The 18 Strong Podcast, episode number 162, talking all about interval training.
Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast, where you get direct access to the world's greatest experts on training harder, practicing smarter, and playing better golf. Now, here's your host, Jeff Pellizzero.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the 18 Strong Podcast. I am Jeff Pellizzero, your host, and this week, we are talking interval training. And normally on the 18 Strong Podcast, we have a guest, somebody exciting, somebody entertaining in the world of golf or fitness to help you get stronger on, off the course, whatever it might be. Unfortunately for you, this week, we are just doing an episode of me basically kind of doing a little educational piece on interval training. I've recently been kind of fascinated. I've always been fascinated with the idea of interval training, and I have wanted to learn a little bit more, and I figured this is a great opportunity for me to learn and to also help you learn a little bit more about intervals and how to use them appropriately, why they can be so efficient, and are they appropriate for you? And so really, this is going to be kind of a book report, because there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Martin Gibala, who is kind of the front runner in research on interval training. And he has written a book recently called The 1 Minute Workout. And while originally I wanted to wait and get Dr. Gibala on the show, I was reading the book and figured this is a perfect opportunity to, again, learn for myself, but also help to teach you and help you learn a little bit more about intervals and whether you should be doing them or how you should be doing them. As you know, we're always looking for ways to train smarter, but also train harder and figure out how to kind of maximize our efforts when we're in the gym or whatever you're doing in the world, in your world of improving your golf game, improving your fitness, improving your health. And I can remember going to the TPI Fitness Level 2 course years ago, and Dr. Mark Smith was kind of giving a lecture on interval training. And we went through a whole practical of, going through different interval stations, and it was really one of the hardest workouts I've ever gone through personally. And I remember talking to him about Dr. Gibala, and he was saying how this guy, whom I believe Mark had a chance to work with at some point and do some research with, was doing some interval training research and was going to be coming out with some very effective stuff and some kind of cutting edge ideas revolving around interval training. But what I really took away from that presentation from Mark was how effective and how quick it can be effective and how we should really be implementing some of this into our routine. So today what we're going to do, I'm going to share primarily what I've learned from this book, some of the studies that were in here. We're going to break down the basics and the overall benefits of including interval training into your program, into your weekly program, whatever you're doing. We're going to explain a little bit of the physiology, but we're going to break it down very simply. Again, there are some incredibly intelligent trainers, medical professionals listening to the show, but I want to talk to specifically the golfers so they understand a little bit more about what's going on and why this stuff's so important. We're going to share some of the studies, some of the research that Dr. Gibala has done, and then also talk a little bit about some of the other studies that have been done. And we're going to address some of the concerns and maybe misconceptions that you may have or that are kind of circling in the world of fitness. And then we're going to lay out a few of the protocols from the book specifically, so you have some action steps of something that you can take with you and you can do tomorrow if you want when you're in the gym. And then lastly, I'm going to share my experience and some of my biggest takeaways and frankly, why you as a golfer should even care about any of this stuff. Obviously, fitness has become a big part of golf, but is this really something that is appropriate for you if becoming a better golfer is your primary concern? So those are kind of the topics we're going to cover. I want to say a quick thanks to our sponsor for this week's episode, which is Scratch TV. Once again, Scratch has an incredible series out right now called Adventures in Golf, where Eric Anders Lang travels all around the world, just going to different places, different unique situations, and sharing stories with the people from those areas, and getting a chance to play these different golf courses and really telling the story about that specific situation, that specific location, and just the game and how much fun it can be for everyone across the world. And hopefully in the near future, we're actually going to have Eric on the show to kind of go through some of these adventures and get some more great stories. So head over to Scratch TV. Actually, I was just talking to Jason from Scratch the other day, and he said the best place to go to find their content, scratchtv.com is kind of the hub, and it links to all of the different social media outlets. But going to Facebook is primarily where most of their content is going to be held or is held. You can also go to YouTube. You can go to Instagram, all those different places. But he said the number one spot to go is to Facebook. So definitely go check them out over on Facebook. That's Scratch TV. Okay, so let's get into some of the basics revolving around interval training. What we're going to call kind of steady state moderate training is the other type. But so basically, there's kind of two types that we're gonna focus on here. Two types of exercises, or you might even be thinking in your head, cardio. When we think of cardio, we typically think of getting on a treadmill for a long period of time, kind of that steady state, monotonous kind of a workout. So that's going to be kind of in one box. On the other side, we're going to put the box of interval training. And so the traditional steady state kind of exercise, it's basically it's defined as traveling at a certain distance or time at a relatively constant pace. So think jogging, swimming, biking, that type of a workout. The other type of exercise that we're going to focus on is interval training, and that's basically bursts of intense exercise separated by periods of recovery or rest or kind of light movement, not nearly as intense movement. And so typically common thoughts revolving around interval training is that intervals are really only meant for athletes. Only athletes are going to be out there doing sprints or these high intensity exercises. It's only meant for more fit people, and it's going to be too intense for the regular Joe or somebody that's a little bit more sedentary or sits a lot at their desk job or travels in the car. So people also have the connotation that intervals can be dangerous for somebody that's not used to performing exercise at high intensity levels. And then also, most people that are starting an exercise program, whether it be for golf or whatever, is usually to combat a little bit of those extra pounds that they've put on. So cutting fat is definitely one of the reasons why people exercise. And it's long been thought that in order to burn as many calories and to cut fat, we need to have these long duration exercise bouts or these different sessions that are long and slow in order to get that caloric burn like we see on the treadmills. You put your hands on the treadmill or the bike and it measures how many calories you've burned in that hour. Well, if you're doing a short bout of intervals, you're not going to see as many calories burned as if you do being on the treadmill for an hour. So let's see if this piques your interest. What if I told you that you could improve your cardiorespiratory fitness and you could burn as much fat with only 3 minutes of exercise per week as you can by doing 2.5 hours of exercise per week? It seems totally crazy, right? Well, that's kind of the basic theme of this whole book. It hammers home the idea that intervals are so much more efficient than long duration exercises when it's done right and when the situation is correct for you. And the great part is it's not super complicated. You know how we like to keep things simple here at 18 Strong. So let me give you a little bit of background here. The public health guidelines generally call for roughly 2.5 hours of moderate intensity exercises per week. So that's 150 minutes of exercise per week that they're calling for, saying that that's your healthy guideline. But the probably number one complaint that I hear very often is, I simply don't have that amount of time. I'm working, I have kids, I have a job, I'm running a soccer practice, or whatever it is. I don't have time to spend 150 minutes in the gym. That could be 3 50-minute sessions. That could be broken down many different ways, but who has that kind of time these days? We're all super, super busy. And then the second complaint I get is, even if I do have that time, I don't really know what to do when I get there. So I'm sometimes just kind of spinning my wheels. So that's where we're going to talk about the idea of interval training. I want to kind of separate what interval training is just a little bit. So again, it's bursts of activity, bursts of exercise for short periods of time, followed by some sort of rest period. Now, you've probably heard the term HIIT, HIIT, and that stands for high intensity interval training. And that's typically what people think about when they're thinking of intervals. There's another kind of branch of HIIT training, and that it's even more intense than that. It's called sprint interval training, SIT, and that's where you go to maximal, all-out, 100% effort followed by a rest period. So interval training, high-intensity interval training, HIIT exercises can be at kind of a little bit more than moderate intensity levels, whereas the sprint interval training is considered to be maximal effort. It can also be called super high intensity interval training. So SHIIT. I have to look at my notes here as I'm going through here. But basically, there's a couple different types of HIIT training. Just know that. So scientists generally define fitness, I use that term in quotes, fitness, in terms of cardiorespiratory fitness. And they do that because the better your heart is pumping blood, then the longer it takes for you to get out of breath. And that then equates to the farther that you can run, bike, swim, play a sport, do whatever cool stuff you're doing. So the longer you can go in those different sports, that kind of shows that you are more fit. What this also does is it's been shown via studies that it reduces your chance of developing ailments like cardiovascular disease and diabetes, the higher level of cardiorespiratory fitness you have. So that's why they kind of use that template or that bar for determining whether someone's fit or not. And that's what we're going to kind of use as our gauge, looking at a lot of these studies and just using interval training as kind of a guideline here. Now, for golfers, does that really matter if you can run a long distance or swim or bike? Not really, but basically, in my eyes, it applies to having better stamina on the golf course. If you have better cardiorespiratory fitness, you're not going to get out of breath as much if you're walking up and down the hills. If you have to play a couple rounds a day or over a couple days in a row, your body's not going to be as stressed, or it's going to be able to handle and bounce back in a situation like that. An example, I just had a golfer who won the club championship at his club, and he ended up playing 38 holes of golf that day because they went into a couple extra holes. And I have no doubt that part of the reason why he was able to come back he was down 6 holes at one point during the match, he was able to come back and win. And I have no doubt that it was because he does some fitness related stuff, and the other guy that he played most likely does not. In fact, I kind of know that he does not. So that's where some of this comes in, but also just general health wise, you want to make sure that you're, putting yourself at the best possible potential for not developing these things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and that you're just generally healthy overall. Now, the most scientific way to measure the cardiorespiratory fitness is through what is called the VO2 max, and that's basically your maximal oxygen uptake, and that's your body's ability to transport and utilize oxygen. So, I kind of picture Ivan Drago from Rocky IV. He's in the labs, or he's going through his workouts. He's got the mask on. He's got all these lights bleeping around him, and so that's kind of what they did in these different scientific research studies. They actually tested the VO2 max. That's not what I expect any of you to do listening to the show, but I want you to know that that's kind of how they tested what was going on in each other's body. And our body basically has 2 ways of powering movement. And you've probably heard these terms before. The first is anaerobic, and anaerobic is short bursts of power. It accounts for quick movements, explosive movements, things that only take a couple of seconds. And I think of quick sprints, Olympic lifts, or even the golf swing is a very anaerobic movement. It's a very powerful movement. Then the other way of powering movement is through our aerobic system, and that's generally less intense movements for long periods of time. So again, think jogging, swimming, hiking, etc. And so for a long time, it was thought that sprints and intervals really only helped somebody increase their speed and even their power, but that only moderate exercise actually helped the aerobic system. So if you weren't somebody that was playing a sport that required, quick bursts of speed and energy, and you weren't playing soccer or basketball or something like that, most people were like, why the heck would I do an interval? Why would I do any kind of a sprint? But recent findings have shown that intervals, especially repeated intervals, I guess that's kind of a redundant statement, help the aerobic system too. And they help especially because it increases the amount of, here's a big word, mitochondria in the muscles, which is something that was documented by to also happen in long duration training. So the moderate exercise showed an increase in mitochondria in the muscles. The mitochondria is basically the powerhouse of the cell. They're cellular bodies that use oxygen to burn fuel. So the more mitochondria and the more efficient the body is at using oxygen, the better your VO2 max is. So what they noticed was that through long duration, this moderate exercise, they noticed increase in mitochondria, which made people fitter, made people be able to run and bike and things longer. What they noticed and were kind of shocked by is that these interval training sessions were also producing the same kind of increases in the mitochondria in the muscles, but just in a much, much, much shorter period of time. So I'm going to get a little bit nerdy here. We're going to go through 2 studies that Dr. Gibala did that really kind of opened the scientific world's eyes to the potency that these interval training exercises have. So the first study that he did was in 2004, and I believe they called this the Wingate study. There's a test called the Wingate that measures your VO2 max, and basically it's you get on a stationary bike, they set it to a certain level of resistance, and you mash the pedals as hard as you can for 30 seconds, and they kind of see, what your VO2 max does or what it is. So what they did was they took a group of people, and I think they were people from the university that he's at, which is McMaster University. I think what they did was they took this group of people. I don't remember how many were in the group. It was kind of a smaller study. And again, I'm going to reference some of the studies that Dr. Gibala did, and then in his book, he talks about a lot of other studies that were not performed by him and his team, just so you guys know that. But in this study, what they did was to pre-test these people. They had them come in, they put a fixed resistance on the bike, and they simply had the person pedal to exhaustion. They didn't tell them when to stop, how long to go. They just pedaled to exhaustion. And I believe they went on average 26 minutes. So then what they did was they took all of these people and they over the course of 2 weeks, they did 6 training sessions. And so in these training sessions, what they did were they used the kind of the Wingate method. So they did 4 Wingates, and that was 4 intervals of 30 seconds on the bike, as hard as they could possibly go. So they did it for 30 seconds, then they would rest for a full 4 minutes at just a very light pedal. Then they would do their second interval. So they did that a total of 4 times. What they noticed just over the course of 2 weeks, so 6 sessions, was that their endurance, when they were retested, nearly doubled. It went from being able to pedal at that same resistance on the bike for 26 minutes to the average of 51 minutes, which is huge, just in this short period of time. What they also showed was they did biopsies of the muscles, and they showed that simply in that 2-week period, just with those 6 training sessions, which was just 16 total minutes of hard work over 2 weeks, if you really break down to when they actually pedaled hard, it only amounted to 16 minutes. It showed that there was an increase in the mitochondria in the muscles, which is crazy because they were showing that with long duration, moderate exercise, it was taking a much longer period of time to show these kinds of changes in the muscles. Okay, so that was the first study that they did. The second study they did was to kind of take it and juxtapose it against the long, moderate duration exercise. So they took 2 groups. They had one group, which they called the moderate group, and it was basically a rigorous training session for 6 weeks. And what they did was for 5 days each week, they did 40 to 60 minutes of work on, I believe it was on the bike again. So 5 days, they did 40 to 60 minutes a day, and roughly at 65% of their max effort. What they then took, the other group, they took the interval group, and all they had them do was a much shorter and abbreviated training session. They did a short warm-up, then they did a 30-second sprint on the bike with a 4.5-minute rest, and they repeated that 4 to 6 times. But they only did their training sessions 3 days a week compared to the 5 days a week of the other group. So in a total of 1/3 of the time, the interval group only worked 1/3 of the time, and that includes their rest breaks. So they actually did less than 10 minutes of actual work each week compared to the 4.5 hours of work that the moderate group exercise did. So that's less than 5% of the amount of time actually working. What they showed was at the end of 6 weeks, the results in all of their fitness parameters were virtually identical. So their aerobic fitness levels all increased, but they increased about the same level. The amount of mitochondria in the muscle also increased in both, but at the exact same level. And their ability to burn fat in both groups increased, and it was all roughly at about the same level. So think about that again. In 1/3 of the time, they were able to get exactly the same results over the course of 6 weeks. And really, as far as the work was concerned, they only did 5% of the amount of work. So these were huge, huge groundbreaking results. So how is this possible? How does this happen? What is it about intervals that are so potent and effective? Well, as I mentioned before, there are people that are listening to this podcast that are much smarter than me. They know the energy systems way more detailed than I do. But basically, I want to break this down as simply as possible. There are several ways that the body can use the energy that it has within it. And the most efficient way, over the course of time, not being able to just break it into these quick little bursts, the most efficient way to burn energy is through what's called oxidative metabolism. And that's basically using oxygen to burn sugars and fats for energy. So the key here is that getting oxygen and fuels to the mitochondria is super important. So as we exercise, and the harder we go, the better it is. As we exercise, the body becomes more efficient at doing this, at getting oxygen and fuel to the mitochondria. Plus, it seems like the more and the harder we exercise, we develop more mitochondria. And again, that has more potential for us to be in better shape and utilize it more efficiently. The bottom line is that our bodies adapt. In fact, Dr. Hans Selye, hope I'm pronouncing that right, came up with the general adaptation syndrome, which basically states that the body responds in a manner to reduce stress the next time. So when we do something, we push our bodies hard, our bodies adapt so that it gets better for the next time. So the harder we push, the more we adapt. And that's why the first time you try something, especially related to exercise, it can seem terrible. It can seem outlandish at how hard it is. But the next time you do it, it's a little bit easier. The next time you do it, it's a little bit easier. So think about, if you have to run up the stairs real quick, say you start a new job and you have to go up to the second floor, and the only way to do it is go up the steps. The first day you do it, it's going to be hard. But as you continue to do it every day, it becomes nothing. So unlike aerobic training, interval training is able to produce a much more drastic effect and adaptation. And the reason it does this is because intervals recruit more of the muscles that we're using. So you've probably heard the term slow twitch, fast twitch muscles, type 1 muscles, which are the slow twitch, type 2, which are the fast. Well, basically, aerobic training pretty much only recruits the slow twitch muscles, so the type 1 muscle fibers. But with interval training, especially with repeated intervals, you're going to get a little bit of both. You're going to get those fast twitch because you're using those fast burst type muscles, but you're also going to recruit the slow twitch because of the extended period of time and just the repeated cycle where you're kind of tapping into that aerobic system. So this causes a much faster depletion of the fuel that's in our body, the fuel that's in our muscles, and that triggers a much bigger effect on the body. So the bottom line here, I know that was a lot of jargon and a lot of sciencey talk, but the bottom line here is what it really boils down to, and what Dr. Gibala really hammers home is that intensity, the amount of intensity, is way more important than the duration of your exercise. So long we've been taught that it's, these long bouts of exercise that are going to make these big, huge changes, and that those are the most effective. But what science is now showing is that it's not so much about the duration, it's about the intensity of the work. And then it's also about the change that happens from the intervals, going from rest to high intensity to rest to high intensity. And that's really kind of where the magic happens. Okay, so all of that is great to have all that information, but I can hear some people saying, first of all, still not sure that this is for me. And second of all, is this even safe to do? So if somebody hasn't exercised or isn't in a current exercise program, is this really even safe to do? Because it only seems to make sense that it would put a bigger demand on the cardiovascular system, and maybe there's some sort of risk of heart attack. And basically what one of his colleagues in the book said, the biggest risk is not getting off the couch. That's the big risk. But in terms of the interval training, in 2015, the American College of Sports Medicine actually did put out a statement that said vigorous intensity exercise does have a small but measurable acute risk of cardiovascular disease complications. So what it's saying is that there is a slightly elevated risk during that exercise, as you're doing the exercise, and shortly thereafter, of some sort of cardiovascular disease complication. But in 2016, the American College of Cardiology, Sports, and Exercise Leadership Council stated that the risk factor for sudden cardiac death was extremely low, which was one incidence in 1.42 million hours of exercise. So it shows that, yes, there is some sort of increased risk when doing this kind of exercise. But as the other colleague stated, the bigger risk is not doing anything. And what the studies also showed was that, yes, while there is that risk, the more someone does any kind of higher intensity exercises, more bouts of vigorous exercise, it actually decreased the risk of heart attack during the event the more that they did it. So as they continued to get healthier by doing more exercise, it showed less chance of them getting hurt. So basically, the workouts had a slight increase in cardiac event while they're exercising, but the rest of the time, that exercise is actually lowering your risk for cardio problems. I know that might be a little confusing, but think of it this way. If you start to do it, the more you work out, the more you include this into your regimen, the more fit and healthy you're getting, and therefore your risk is decreasing. Now, the one thing that they did mention was that as you age, and no surprise, as you age, the risk becomes a little bit higher. So again, if you're, say, in your 60s or in your 70s, should you just jump in and do, an interval, a Wingate right out of the bat? No, let's be smart about it, kind of work yourself in. Now, it's one thing to say that it's going to decrease your risk, but why would that happen? Why does the interval training help the cardiovascular system? Well, what happens and what's been shown is that your vessels actually become more pliable. So your arteries, your veins become more pliable. They call that the endothelial function gets better. So the heart doesn't have to work as hard because the vessels are able to take and transport the blood much easier. So the heart doesn't have to push as hard to get the blood to go where it needs to go. So it doesn't get bogged down. Now, usually what happens with age is the heart gets a little weaker, the vessels get a little stiffer, and that is where the big risk comes in. So doing the interval training has shown that it can almost kind of maintain or even revert some of these changes that we normally experience from aging. The other huge benefit is in relation to sugar and your blood's ability to handle sugar and glucose tolerance. And just as a fact, there's 60 to 75 million Americans that are at this point right now insulin resistant. 30 million of those have diabetes, and 90 to 95% of those are type 2 diabetes, which is mainly related to lifestyle changes, which are like poor diet and physical inactivity. So there was a study done in 2010 on an obese population, all of whom had type 2 diabetes, and they used what Dr. Gibala calls the 10 by 1 interval protocol. And basically that's 1 minute on of interval training and then 1 minute off, so resting for a minute. And they did it at about 85% of their maximal heart rate. So what they did was for 6 sessions over 2 weeks, they had these people doing these exercises. And what they noticed was, they tracked their glucose levels. They actually had a device under their skin for over a 24-hour period. They noticed that the blood glucose concentrations dropped 13% in just these 2 weeks of time. They only did roughly an hour of training in these 2 weeks, and it dropped their blood glucose concentrations by 13%, which over time, if this was extended out, could possibly reverse the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes in these individuals. All right, before we go any further and continue with some of the sciencey stuff, I want to say a quick thanks to our sponsor for this episode, Rad Roller. Rad Roller, as you probably know, are the makers of some of the greatest soft tissue and myofascial products on the market. I'm a big fan of them. We use them here at the gym. I use them with a lot of my clients, and Rad Roller is all over the place. I see it online. I see them on Instagram. I see tons and tons of professional athletes using the Rad Roller products. Basically, they have different tools to fit all the different spots on your body, to work on the knots, get things loosened up, and help you moving better and swinging a club better. And I'm very happy to announce that Rad Roller is coming here to St. Louis for all the medical and fitness professionals out there for their Mobility Level 1 and the first ever Golf Mobility Rad Level 1 course here in St. Louis, hosted by 18 Strong. So if you have any information, or if you have any interest in coming to that class, be sure to check out on radroller.com. You can go to their certification page and find the information on that course here in St. Louis on November 12th, 2017. If you haven't checked out the Rad Roller products, go to radroller.com. You can find them, search for them, and be sure to use the code 18Strong. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of the science and shown reasons why interval training can be so beneficial and why you might want to include this into your workout program. Again, if you're a golfer, the primary reason is because of the time efficiency and the health-related reasons, but as well, giving you the ability to improve your stamina over the course of a round of golf. Plus, the fact that you're doing the interval trainings can definitely help out with some of the speed and your ability to create power. But primarily, I think the cardiovascular fitness is the number one thing that we're going for. The question is, okay, how do I get started? If I'm not somebody who has done interval training before, how do I jump in? Or if I have done it and don't really know if I've been doing it right, how do I get started? So the first thing, and we always have to say this, it's the obligatory go check with your doctor. If you have any concerns, any questions about being able to do this, by all means, be smart, go talk to your doctor, get a physical, do whatever you need to do. If you've been on an exercise program already, you're already used to a little bit of intensity in your training, I want you to just, again, be smart. The second component, and this is echoed in the book, is, as Dr. Gibala states, don't be a hero. I'm going to kind of rephrase it and say, don't be a bonehead. So this is, I'm speaking to myself here because, as you get into a book like this, you're reading something like this, you're learning something new, you're like, oh man, I'm going to implement this. And so I've been doing some intervals in my training for a little while, and I decided, I'm going to ramp this up a little bit. And my son's playing soccer these days. And so we went up to the park the other day, and I was like, oh, well, I'll do some sprints and have him do a few with me if he's interested. And so we did a few runs, and on the last sprint, going as hard as possible. I'm a 39-year-old man that hasn't touched a soccer ball in a year, but I play once a year, so I figured, this will be a great way to get ready. And what do? I tweak a hammy and pull up lame, and so have been nursing that for the past week. So again, follow the don't be a bonehead rule. Don't just jump into this 100 miles an hour like some of us idiots do. Be smart about it. If you've never done any kind of interval training, just go in and boost the intensity level, a small percentage. So if you're using what we call the rate of perceived exertion scale, so that's the level 1 is no exertion whatsoever. Level 10 is, as described in the book, go as fast and as hard as you can as if you were trying to save a baby from an oncoming car or something along those lines. So if this is your first time, start out at like an intensity level of maybe 3 or maybe 5 and kind of feel it out a little bit. Figure out what exercise works for you. Maybe running an all-out sprint on a soccer field like me wasn't probably the best decision. So, maybe it's a bike, maybe it's doing a rower, maybe it's something like that. So then work your way into some of the submaximal intervals. And then only when you're comfortable and only when you're ready should you move into the more advanced and into the max effort kind of protocols. Now, what I want to do is give you a few protocols from the book and then just kind of talk about a few things related to them so you practically have something to go with. The first one is called just basic training. And so for this one, and I'll type these out and have these in the show notes. So if you go to 18strong.com, search for episode number 162, and I'll have these different ones labeled out. So you have the exact breakdown of each of these. So you don't have to write notes while you're in the car or whatever you're doing right now. So for basic training, this one takes 30 minutes. And on all of these, his recommendation, or just to keep things the same every time, he did a 3-minute warm-up, a 2-minute cool-down. So recognize that in all of these, 5 of those minutes is actually warming up and cooling down. So this one takes 30 minutes. After you do your warm-up, you do a 3-minute interval. So 3 minutes of what I would call an interval or high-intense interval at a level, roughly around level 7 on that rate of perceived exertion scale. And then after that 3 minutes, you're going to rest for 3 minutes. So that would be, back off the intensity. So let's just use the bike as an example. You're going to go for 3 minutes at a level 7 of intensity. After that 3 minutes, you're going to drop it down, let's say maybe to a 1 or a 2, and just kind of pedal lightly. And you're going to repeat that for a total of 5 times, and that's going to be a 30-minute workout. And so that's one way. That's a good one to kind of bring you into the fold of interval training, just kind of starting out a little lighter. And you can go a little less than 7, but just, again, kind of scale it up for yourself. Another one that he mentions in the book, and I knew this would be popular because most of us, again, are looking to lean out or trim up a little bit, is called the fat burner. And the fat burner simply takes 25 minutes and, again, 5 minutes of a warm-up. And then this one's a way different interval. So instead of a 3-minute like the last one, this one only has an 8-second interval, or I'm going to kind of call it a sprint, but not necessarily a sprint. 8 seconds of going hard, and then 12 seconds of resting. And you can either shut it down and not do anything, stop pedaling, or pedal at a light pace. If you're on a bike, it probably makes more sense to just kind of keep the pedals moving a little bit. So you're going 8 seconds on, 12 seconds off, and then you're going to repeat this as many times as possible in 20 minutes. And I think that ends up being like 60 different 8-second intervals. Now, this is going to be hard. I haven't done this one yet, but I'm looking forward to doing this one. This is going to be hard. That 20 minutes is going to feel like a long, long time, but once you're done, you're done. You're able to mash. You're going to find that 8 seconds is going to start to feel longer, and it's almost going to feel like somebody's turning up the resistance on the bike because your muscles are getting so fatigued, the blood is rushing in there, and you're really going to start to feel those effects. But you're going to see how afterwards, how much you're amped up and revved up. Okay, and then we talked about the 10-by-1 interval a little bit earlier in the episode. And basically it's a 25-minute workout, 5-minute warm-up, and you're going to go 1 minute on at maybe a level of starting out at a 5 of intensity and go up to a 9 of intensity. And so that's going to be 1 minute on and then 1 minute off. Just to go back to the fat burner, again, you're going to ramp up that intensity too. So when you start out for that 8 seconds, that 8-second interval, don't start out going 100 miles an hour. Start out at maybe a 5 or 6 and kind of slowly ramp up. All right, on the 10-by-1 again. So you're 1 minute on, you're 1 minute off, and you're going to repeat that a total of 10 times. So that's a very easy one to remember. That's one that I've done many a times just because it's so simple to remember. You can just set up your timer, or if you're watching a clock, simply 1 minute on, 1 minute off. Okay, so those are 3 great interval programs. Now, the question that many people ask in the world of science, in the world of fitness, is what's the absolute least amount of work I can get away with that's still going to be beneficial for me. And the crazy thing is, through all these different studies and through this book, I've learned that the answer is simply 1 minute, 60 seconds. And it's crazy. So the studies they did, and we're going to walk through this in a second, really showed that it all boils down to intensity. And it's not so much how long you're going. Again, it's how hard you're going. So he calls these micro workouts. But the key to the micro workout is that you have to hit it as hard as possible. So again, you have to kind of ease yourself into these. But once you're ready to go, these can be super, super effective and super, super efficient. So the 12-week study that Dr. Gibala did was on a group of individuals broken up into two groups. And I'm going to call them the sprint group and we'll say the moderate group. So the sprint group, their workouts in total, every ounce of time was 30 minutes per week. They actually only did 3 minutes of work per week. So they did a 10-second on and 2 minutes off in each of their workouts. And that was all they had to do. So the moderate activity group, they did 150 minutes of work per week, and that was continuous exercise for 30 to 50 minute sessions. The crazy thing is, just with that short amount of time, so again, the sprint group did 3 10-minute workouts. The other group did 150 minutes of workouts per week. Both of them improved their cardio fitness by 19%. Their body fat dropped by 2%. Both groups increased their mitochondria at the same levels, and both improved their management of blood sugars at the same levels. I mean, it's just crazy the effectiveness that this little workout has. So the workout that he deemed the 1 minute workout, it goes like this. It's a 10-minute workout. Again, you're doing your warm up, you're doing your cool down. So that's 5 minutes right there. And then you have a 20-second on cycle, and that's all out. That's max effort. That's as hard as you can go. And then you're doing a 2-minute rest period. And then you're going to repeat that only 3 times. So that's only 1 minute of actual work that you're doing. And then you're resting 2 minutes in between each one. So a total of 10 minutes. And you have gotten the same results that the group that did 150 minutes of workout at moderate intensity throughout the week. I mean, it's just crazy how effective this stuff can be. So this is definitely a program that's very easy to fit into anybody's schedule. So anybody that says they don't have time to work out, they now know that they have the option of the 1 minute workout. And again, you can kind of try moving into this. Just be safe doing it. The bottom line here is that you have to be, if time is a big issue for you, efficiency is going to be very precious. Now, there's so many other things that we typically want to do in our fitness program: strength training, using weights, mobility, all these other things. This is just one option to give you a little bit more of an edge in your fitness program. So just know that this isn't the end all be all, and there's tons of ways to get other exercises in. But again, this is simply one great option for you to start to have in your toolbox. Now, there's a couple key factors that I want to kind of end on here, and that's just what the same stuff that Dr. Gibala kind of came up with. And I'm just going to reiterate his big takeaways is, first of all, number one, there's no free lunch. And what that means is that if you want to be time efficient, you have to be willing to put in the work. You have to be willing to put in the effort, and you have to be ready to, put your tail on the line in order to get those maximum benefits. The second thing that he noticed and has kind of seen in science is that if you are an athlete, if you are somebody who's maybe a long distance runner or training for some other sport, swimming, jogging, which this doesn't necessarily apply to the golfers listening to the show, or may, depending on what other activities you do. But if you really need that longer duration cardiovascular fitness, it's helpful to do longer sprint or longer intervals. So 3, even 5 minute intervals of the work time, and then same with the rest in between. So by doing that, you're going to create those changes and adapt a little better for those longer duration kind of activities. The third is that short sprints are more fun. So if this sounds miserable to you, just know that the shorter the sprint, the easier it's going to be for you to get through it and to want to do it again. So that's why I like that fat burning cycle, the fat burning interval program where it's 8 seconds on, 12 seconds off. I'm excited to try that because, if you get mentally strong, you can think I can do anything for 8 seconds and then I get a break. And I think that's where that mental advantage comes in. And then the last thing that I want to share here is, just get creative with it. There's no one that says you have to do a sprint exactly like this. You can mix it up. You can have some variety to it. You can try different things. It doesn't have to always be a rower or a bike. It can be, the battle ropes. You could even he talks a lot about, using some strength related exercises in this where you can do some body weight stuff. You could do squats, you can do push-ups, you could try pull-ups. I'm not a big fan of doing pull-ups at breakneck speed, but he mentions burpees. Again, I'm not a huge fan of burpees just because I think a lot of people can't get in the right positions to do that properly, and there's risk of hurting oneself. So again, you have to be really, really smart about the way that you approach it, but you can also get creative. So one way that I have kind of adapted a couple of these different things just since reading the book, and I was short on time the last couple of days, and I wanted to still get in my workouts, and so I broke it up. Yesterday I did an interval that lasted 18 minutes, not counting my warm-ups and cool-downs. It was 18 minutes. I picked 3 exercises. Yesterday I did kettlebell swings. I did a goblet squat and the rower, and I did 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, and I just kind of cycled through each of those exercises. And then today I did the exact same layout as far as the timing is concerned, but I did a dumbbell press on the Swiss ball. I did a bent over row with both dumbbells, and I did a shoulder press with some kettlebells. And I did the same thing, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, repeated that whole thing 18 times. And so I did each exercise 6 times. And I'll tell you what, 18 minutes, got a lot of work done. So bottom line is have fun with this. Know that, again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Like I said before, there are many other studies and citations in the book, The 1 Minute Workout. I definitely recommend you go check out the book. And eventually, I do hope to get Dr. Gibala on here so we can, create some questions around this podcast and formulate them for him. So if you have any questions, by all means, ask them in our private Facebook group, the 18 Strong Movement, and we will, kind of address what we can and then save some for if we get Dr. Gibala on the line. Practically, for doing these, a big issue can be keeping your time, tracking yourself. So I know that there's a lot of apps on the market that you can use. I'm not a huge fan of using my phone, but we've got the benefit of a wall clock here in the gym that is able to do some interval timers. There's also a couple different timers I was looking at on Amazon called the Gym Boss, and there's a couple other ones that you can actually set to different timing intervals. As far as what to use and what to do during your exercises, I'm a big fan of the row machine. I'm a big fan of the Airdyne bike. I hate it, but I love it. Any stationary bike, you can literally just go run sprints. Be careful, don't pull your hammy. There's all kinds of stuff, body weight exercises. Again, I'm a big fan of strength training and using weights and dumbbells and barbells and stuff like that. So this will never take over my full training program, but it's definitely been a great addition for myself, for my clients. And with a lot of my clients, what I've been doing lately is we'll still do the regular strength training stuff that we normally would do or work on some of their mobility. And then at the end of the session, I'll leave, 5-10 minutes to include some sprints into their program. And it's been great. People love it. They feel tired when they leave. Everybody likes to feel tired when they leave. So it's definitely helped with the clients and getting them to push themselves a little bit harder and giving them some parameters on how to do that. So again, hopefully you guys, I know that there's probably so many questions or so many things I wanted to include in this episode, probably so many things I'm forgetting, But I think this is a good jumping off point for us here in the 18 Strong community to get a little bit more efficient with our workouts and figure out how to properly use some interval training. If you want any more information on this episode specifically, just go to 18strong.com, search for episode number 162, and I'll have all the information there. I'll have the different interval programs broken down so you can see those and you can start using those. And be sure to go check out our sponsors for this week's episode, Scratch TV and the Adventures in Golf series, as well as the folks over at Rad Roller. They've both been extremely super supportive of the 18 Strong podcast. Can't thank them enough. All right, we look forward to catching up with you again next week. Train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.
Thanks for listening to the 18 Strong podcast at www.18strong.com. And remember, train hard, practice smart, and play better golf.